Hey everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Jen and I am basically a resume evangelist. So if those of you are who are here are struggling, you're submitting for jobs and you're not getting traction, you're 100% in the right place. The reason I am such a big fan of resumes is that that's how our clients get traction in their job search. That's how they get interviews. That's what leads to them getting offers. And so what I really want to share today, or what I want to offer, is that I think there's a different way to think about resumes. Right now, most of you are probably thinking like, this is a relic and it's something that I have to do. But when done really well and with the right process, this should be a very effective career asset that can position you for jobs that are both kind of a typical trajectory and also for folks who are making a transition or pivot. So let's dive in. Before we get started, let me share a little bit about who I am and why I know anything at all about resumes. I'm going to drop some links in the chat here in case anyone wants to connect on social. So I very accidentally fell into the hiring process. I was working in higher education and I was responsible for faculty and administrative searches for many years. I got my master's degree at night and I actually really loved going through the work of hiring people in education, right? People in education are really motivated and excited about their work. And I had the opportunity to watch thousands of applicants, because if you know anything about academic searches, there's hundreds, sometimes thousands of applicants for one or two openings. And so I really saw through my own work what it took to move from applicant in a giant pool to candidate to finalist to job offer. And a few years ago, well, actually 8 years ago, I started Work Wonders as a side hustle, and it is now my full-time gig. So I help people land new jobs and thrive at work. And about 85 to 90% of our clients get their new job by applying cold online, not knowing anyone, not having anyone who can kind of put their application in front of the right people. It's a great strategy. If you have those connections, you should use them. But what I want to offer today is sort of a new way to kind of think about your resume. And of course, I'd love to. I'm probably most active on LinkedIn and Instagram, but I'm trying to keep up with the kids over on TikTok. So wherever you use the most, I'd be happy to find you there. Now, I have both a community, a group program, and I work privately with people on their job search. So we have a process, some framework and curriculum that our clients have access to. And today I'm going to show you like the 10,000 foot view. And we're going to apply it specifically to the resume process. And I said in the chat in the last workshop, like Belma's content was really great. She teed me up perfectly. I couldn't have asked for better. Because really the best way to land a job is to have a really good set, or a job that's aligned, right? A job that's strategic and intentional. We want you to have a job that you're excited to say yes about. And that requires something other than just getting a job offer. You have to be diligent, you have to be discerning, and you have to really know what that means for you. And then we have to have a strategic process so that the job search doesn't completely overtake our life. So some people rely on, the volume of applications rather than, the quality of applications and the alignment of applications, which is where we prefer that our clients are. So please let me know in the chat if any of this sounds familiar. You are either sending out lots of applications or hardly any at all. So maybe when you log in and find jobs, you are, again, using that spray and pray volume approach to try and get traction, or you're so overwhelmed with what you're seeing that you're hardly applying to any at all. A lot of people, when they come, they tell me that they come to work with us, they say that they're emailing themselves jobs or saving jobs, but never actually applying. You're lacking confidence or direction. I particularly see this in people who are undervalued in their current work. So maybe you're in a place and you haven't gotten a pay raise, or you don't get a lot of validation or credit for your work. That often carries over into people's job search. Maybe you're trying to make sense of conflicting career and resume advice. That is also pretty common. And maybe I've had more than one client tell me this. It's like applying online is like throwing your resume into an internet black hole, which is the opposite of what we want, obviously. So here are some rules that I think are in the back of people's mind that I want you to be ready to part with by the time we're done here. That there's one right way to do a resume. You have to do it this way. You have to use this template. Okay, we'll talk about that. The resume can't be longer than a page. We're going to do away with that too. Everyone gets jobs via networking. Now, I really value relationships. I love what Belma was saying about authenticity and connection. And I truly view the job search not as transactional, but as a relational process. But your resume can help initiate those relationships as well. And I'll talk more about that. You think you are trying to, get through the ATS system and you're trying to add a lot of keywords to your resume, or otherwise nobody's going to look at it. I hear this one quite a bit too. It's pretty common. So let me just say this. There's more than one way to write a compelling resume. Okay, so there's no secret template. There's actually no secret. We'll talk about what it takes here and the piece of this that I think a lot of people are missing, which is compelling content. Networking and your resume are complementary strategies in an ideal situation. Now, I have a lot of clients who are introverts and would rather apply for a dozen jobs than talk to another single person they don't know. So, we can leverage one more than the other, and many people do, but they're ideally working together. Conveying your value for the role at hand is key. Now, a lot of people avoid applying for jobs because they feel like they're going to be pigeonholed and stuck and like they can only do the things that they've done, or people only know them for one thing. So it's really our job as job seekers, and certainly as resume writers and career strategists, to help people translate that experience effectively when they're making a pivot. Okay, so we're going to talk about that today too. From the very beginning of this practice, we have written resumes for human readers. We do not write resumes for applicant tracking systems. That's not how I use the applicant tracking system. And thankfully, I also married a recruiter, so I check in with him occasionally to make sure he doesn't have any robot reviewing applications on his behalf. We can talk about applicant tracking systems, but quite frankly, I think you're better off writing a resume that a human is going to read, and we're going to talk about how to do that effectively. Even if you struggle to talk about yourself, if you struggle to understand your value, you are capable and deserve, quite frankly, a strong resume. So I'm going to lay out the steps of that process for you here. And let me show you quickly what they're simple steps. They're not always easy to practice, but the simple aspects here. Your resume needs to be easy to read. When people insist on having their resume on only one page, what it means is, you can do that for 5 to 8 years, but eventually there's just a lot of content on there. And so having healthy margins, healthy font sizes makes it so that people can consume your experience a lot more quickly. We don't just want to, talk about our experience out of pocket as we remember it. The resume is a marketing tool. It's not a reflection instrument. So we want to be paying attention to the qualifications that are on the job postings and making sure our resume is actually responsive to them so that we look like we're a good fit for the job. Sometimes people are a very good fit, but you wouldn't know it from the way their resume is structured and formatted and the content they're highlighting. As you go through your career, it's probably going to be important that you start to specify the specifics of your qualifications rather than the breadth of your experience. So some people are like, here's everything I've ever done. And that can be helpful early in your career. But as you go on to, niche down or become an expert, you're going to want to get clearer about that. We want to give you tools to communicate with integrity and confidently. So there are things on a resume that I really don't change. Dates of employment, job titles, things that are going to be verified in an employer process. But in terms of the content, we want it to be accurate, of course, but we also want to make sure we're using the right language. And a lot of times people underplay their contributions. Unless you are a design professional, I want you to consider just using a plain Word text, Word document. I use Google Doc for all of mine. There are no real intentional design components. I use bold font, not bold font, bullet points. I have a favorite bullet point, but it's really, really simple and straightforward. And the emphasis is on the content itself. Another little tip that I experienced reading resumes and being on the other side of the table, but also I did see some evidence on this on LinkedIn once, is that I think there's some benefit to getting those applications turned in on the early side of the posting, because what can happen sometimes is that a lot of people apply the longer the job is left up. And sometimes I think you get a better, more thorough review if you're applying within a few days of that job posting. And if you're like, how do I turn around a customized, tailored resume in a few days? We'll talk about that. We'll give you a plan for that by the end of this. And of course, there's some patience that's required. A lot of times people reach out to me when they're at their wit's end and they wanted a new job yesterday. So that's very common, but the job search is never going to go faster than the hiring process. And if you've ever been a part of a hiring process, you know that there's about a million ways that can go sideways, and it often does. So I think here are the metrics we see for most of our clients. We need anywhere from like 2 to 4 weeks to get people's assets in place. Assets being resumes, cover letters, LinkedIn profiles, and then within 4 to 8 weeks of people applying to between 4 and 8 target roles a month, people generally see interviews. And if they don't, it's often because they're coming from self-employment, they're applying for jobs, they're overqualified, they're not tailoring their applications enough, or they're making a really significant transition. But usually another month or so, and we do start to see traction there. So patience is required. And if you're looking at nonprofit or government jobs, that's a whole other beast, a whole other timeline. So patience is really necessary. So going back to that cycle that I showed you that we use the framework for our job search, I'm going to show you what I consider to be like the minimum viable reflection process in order to start your job search, because I really do see the job search as like an experiential process. Too many people try to come up with too many answers before they start applying to places. And what we really want is a research question. I think I'm most interested in roles that allow me to A, B, and C, or roles that are like, include A, B, and C. People try to be like, I would like X role at Y company. And that's like trying to put the conclusion at the front of your research paper instead of at the end where it belongs. So here are some things that our clients do, again, that allow them to kind of move through and create their assets much more quickly. Obviously, as a coaching community, we have reflection prompts and exercises and also conversations with our clients. But I'm also a big fan of journaling and just documenting and writing down your journey and experience and priorities, what you've learned about yourself, what's changed. And what this is this step in the process allows us to communicate difficult truths, say things we don't want to say to hiring committees, but that we do need to kind of own and acknowledge as part of our search process. This is the part that no one else sees but us. And then we turn this into something that can be used as a compelling sort of marketing document for our job search. I also think it's so helpful to look at active job postings and think like, what are the patterns and themes here that are emerging? What are the qualifications I'm seeing pop up over and over and over again? This is going to help us really figure out what kind of language do we need to use? How do we need to translate your experience? Are there gaps? Do we need to kind of figure out a pipeline into the right kind of roles? It's going to help with the strategy so much. Now, writing can feel like a lot of work. So a lot of people will skip this step and go right into the application phase without doing a lot of the self-reflection. But writing is sort of this like free way, but also responding to kind of the evidence that we're seeing as we look at jobs and think through questions and engage with others. This is how we learn. So I want you to think of it as not just a waste of time. It's a pedagogical tool here. Like we're learning more about ourselves, about our interests, what our strengths are. And this is going to be really critical for people who don't feel confident, aren't clear what they're bringing to the table or what their contributions have been. Our goals here are to have a better understanding of yourself and your journey, create priorities for your job search, and create compelling content for your resume, cover letter, and beyond, so that we can come into the writing process prepared. So I'm going to assume that where we're at in the process now is you are ready to look at job postings, okay? And you have found 2 or 3 that really appeal to you. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to pay attention to the jobs that we're applying for. So many people just take a look at those responsibilities and think like, I can do this, or I would like to do this, and then kind of hit submit on their resume. Or they write a really generic cover letter and leave their resume the same way. What we really want to do are look at those qualifications, because those qualifications are like a wish list. And that's what we want to address with our resume. We want to make sure it's crystal clear that we meet those qualifications. Now, if you see qualifications that don't feel like you have them, and that may be the case, you may be underqualified, but here's something I want you to ask first. How are you qualified for this role? If you are switching industries, if you are changing functions, your experience is going to use a slightly different language. Now, obviously, there's a difference between 5 years of experience and 15 years of experience. So this might be a check on, do you need to consider more junior roles? But really what I want you to think about here is unpacking your experience in a way that's going to make sense to audiences in a different field. So let me give you an example. I had a client bring me a job posting, and she was really excited about it, but it had a requirement for a master's degree in science, and she didn't have a master's degree in science. So she was like, I'm not sure. What do you think? I feel like I'm unqualified for this role. And I want you to know she was a medical doctor. She was a physician, an MD. And I said, you know what, we're gonna apply for this job anyways, and we're gonna share the, doctoral level experience you have, as well as the experience you have in a lab, so that people can contextualize your experience. So she was really probably overqualified for the job a little bit, but she was looking to make a transition, and we wanted to be flexible with her science background and how we were communicating that. And then ultimately what we want to do is write our resume like an actual human being is going to be reading it. That is just so important. We're not going to just list a bunch of random disembodied keywords. We're not going to use any like keywords in white font. We're going to just write like we're talking to a person. So this slide is a list of qualifications, and it's quite lengthy. So don't worry if you can't quite read everything. It's lengthy, and that's the takeaway I want you to have. So I just want to point to a few things that I see when I'm looking at this for clients, especially with something that's lengthy, because it's hard to respond to something lengthy in a concise way, like you need to do on your resume, right? So here's what I see. I see some technical skills, right? Pretty modest technical skills, like not coding or anything, but just, Adobe, Microsoft, MailChimp, LinkedIn, social media, LinkedIn Navigator, right? So I see that. I see years of experience, and that is tends to be kind of an important marker for a lot of my clients. So this is pretty entry level. I see what I consider sort of like personal attributes, like energy, flexibility, some soft skills, organizational, time management. And I also see what I consider some areas of expertise: designing, marketing, communications, familiarity with print, web, digital, social media, graphic design, right? So you see, that's how there's a few categories here, and I'm sort of consolidating them in my mind. So this is just an example of a strategy that we call the Summary of Qualifications. Maybe you've seen something like this. It is obviously not an objective statement, and it's also not a personal summary about you. It is a summary about the experience you have that matches and aligns with the qualifications of the jobs that you're interested in. And we create 3 to 5 bullet points that goes underneath your name and header information and above anything else you might share on your resume to help curate your relevant experience, make it super easy to see that you check the boxes that you do, and let the person know that you are qualified for the job and we can move you to the yes pile. So that's sort of how I want you to think about this. So a couple of things to draw your attention to here. I always like to lead with the years of experience. If my client has many more years of experience than the minimum, and it's evident from the first page of their resume that that's the case, then I don't necessarily draw attention to that. But often that's not the case, and I do. So I do years of experience with domains of expertise. I do a second line with that. I have technical skills at the bottom. I talk about soft skills here as well. So let me just pause and see if anyone has any questions here. Also, I'm going to just take a quick sip of water. I'm not seeing any questions, so I'll keep going. So the reason we use this, and find that this is so helpful is it's great for people who are making a career transition, because it allows us to kind of own the narrative up here a little bit. If your last job is not something that makes sense intuitively for your next job, we get to convey your relevant experiences right at the top. Secondly, this is where, if you've heard of customizing and tailoring your resume, which I do think is important for most job seekers, this is going to be a super easy way to do it, because you can obviously reuse things like experience in, and then just replace whatever's here with whatever is in the next job posting. Demonstrated ability to, whatever the next job posting asks for. And I add it right to the resume, Ashley, yes. So do you find, yeah, Molly, you know what, you're always, can I bring this up? I don't know that I can. Molly, that's a great point. If you ask a dozen people for their experience, for feedback on your resume, you will get a dozen different sets of feedback on this. And so I do prefer the bulleted version. And sometimes if people are very senior and they're applying for like CEO or high-level executive jobs or academic jobs, I'll add some more formatting around that. But for most mid-career professionals, I think the bulleted list is fine. If people have a strong preference for a paragraph, I don't personally think that's quite as easy to read, but as long as it's tailored, concise, and yeah, concise really, because paragraphs tend to get generic and long, and they tend to be about the person. So I distinguish this strategy from a personal summary, and I have a personal preference for bullet points over paragraphs, but I wouldn't want that to keep you up at night. Like, the best resume is a submitted one. Okay, well, I got some questions. I have my skills summary in bullet points ahead of my experience list. I use incomplete sentence for Christine, if that's your question here. I have my skills summary in bullet points. Do you recommend more of a sentence? These are not complete sentences. Like, there's no subject in any of them. Yes, Lauren, I call it a summary of qualifications. If you have some experience, yes, great question. I think it's Shanna. What if you have some experience? I would say proficient, familiarity with, novice. Like, you can use language, like, you don't want to say like expert designer, but you could say familiar with Photoshop. Yes, great question. All right, so feel free to keep dropping questions. I'll check periodically. And I also meant to say at the beginning, I have the list of questions that were submitted. I'll go through those quickly at the end, and I'll also be at my booth. So if you have more questions or I don't get to your question in the time we have today, I'll be at the booth on and off all afternoon, so you can ask some questions there. So some additional resume tips, right? Because I realize this doesn't solve all of our resume dilemmas and challenges here, but I want you to remember to share the experience that you do have. Even incomplete experience, like the Shayna's question, reminds us, like, all candidates, all applicants have some degree of experience and relevancy of that experience to the qualifications. So sometimes there's just a rock star applicant in there, but a lot of times there's a few people who have like mixed experience in multiple areas. So we don't want you to just not apply or not bother communicating the experience that you do have. I want you to give yourself the space to share the experience that you have and really translate it as best you can in a way that's going to, help people recognize that you have the experience that they're looking for, even if you're coming from a different industry. If you don't have metrics, let me just say this. I hear from almost every single person that I work with the exception of like some marketers who tend to have great metrics because they just have good systems that kind of set up for these things. But even I do hear this from some marketers nonetheless. If it were based on my experience talking with clients, nobody would have anything to show for their work. It's very difficult for people to get excited about talking about their work when it comes to the experience section. So even if you don't have metrics, I want you to think about the outcome or the impact of that work. What does your work enable? And try to position the bullet point so that it emphasizes that rather than simply describing a task. if appropriate, if you are someone here, and I assume there's people like this here, and you have a ton of technical skills, programming languages or marketers and tech stacks, like all of that, you can, instead of trying to cram it all into one of the bullet points like I did for the early marketer example, you could create an additional skills section. And then I just sort of alphabetize the technical skills so that people, have a sense of what that is. And that's also something you probably don't have to customize every single time if you just do it that way. A lot of times when people are looking to shift in scope, like using percentages instead of raw numbers can be really helpful. So it kind of holds the scope of the organization sort of stable. So I would recommend doing that if you're worried about, if you come from a small nonprofit, but you want to go to a large company, your metrics can just be positioned as percentages. Again, the translation part is so key. So sometimes what I do is I won't even reference people's industries when I'm writing cover letters or summary of qualifications or in their experience section. I will remove as much industry specific experience as possible just to try and help that person. Like, I don't want a recruiter or a hiring manager to be like, why is this person interested in this role? We want to make it really clear. And sometimes just removing that experience can be helpful if it's not something you're actually leveraging. Healthy margins and font size. I know it sounds basic, but you'd be surprised how hard to read some resumes are. So keep it as simple as possible. One time before I gave a very similar webinar, I asked my spouse, like I said, who's also a recruiter, do you have any advice for the people I'm about to speak to? I'm sure they'd love to hear, from a recruiter. And he was just like, please name your document something other than resume. Because every day he has to open up, dozens and dozens of people's resumes, and they're all named like resume or resume 1 or 2. So using your name, using the requisition number, using the job title just to differentiate yourself, I think it does make people look really organized. So that's a little tip for you. And when in doubt, always follow the online application instructions. Sometimes people come to me and they're like, it requires a cover letter, but do I have to write one? I love that advice. Yes, it makes sense if you're a practitioner for sure. I really want to encourage you to do what they say. When I was looking at different portfolios of what people would submit, if we ask for 2 writing samples and you submit 4, I can't read 4 for every candidate that I'm evaluating. So they ask for things for a reason. So sometimes more just isn't more, even if you're really enthusiastic. Pick your best 2. Your successful job search is about successful communication. So I think something gets lost for people if they just don't have a clear plan for how to move from point A to point B on paper. And for a lot of, at least everyone I work with and a lot of job seekers I know, they need to have a resume that really is an asset, that really works for them when they're not in the room to speak to their skills. So spending some time writing for yourself and then transitioning that for writing for other people, both of those steps are really, really critical. But that's not the only piece of the puzzle. So I just want to talk about other aspects of managing and using your resume. Rosanna says, what if they say the cover letter is optional? Should it be skipped? Personally, I never miss an opportunity to add value to my candidacy. And I encourage a lot of my clients to do the same. Your resume can convey your strong communication skills. What I recommend really, if you're going to do one, is that you write a good cover letter. So many cover letters are boring and just basically 3 paragraphs of I statements and very generic. So we work with clients to we look at the summary of qualifications and we're like, how can we add a personal narrative to this process so that people get a sense of who you are and what you're capable of and how you work, and sort of fill in the blanks there. Yeah, they're boring to read. That's why they don't work. I did just have a client who transitioned from the nonprofit to tech world and got an interview and an offer eventually based on her cover letter. So it's one of those things where I don't think they're for recruiters. I think they're often for hiring managers. So I would keep that in mind too. If it's going to stop you from applying, then skip the cover letter. But if you have the time and bandwidth, I think it's really worthwhile. So imperfect action is a part of our process because people are often waiting for perfect environments to get started, perfect circumstances, 100% clarity. And what I think a lot of people mean when they say clarity is certainty. And we really aren't going to have a lot of certainty just looking at our resume, revising our resume, and looking at job. We need to actually engage with other people here. So let's talk a little bit about getting started and getting traction and moving through this process. If you are someone who's using a volume-based approach, I really want to encourage you to reduce the quality of applications and improve the quality. So start using the summary of qualifications, start tailoring it. If you have a couple of specific jobs that you're focused on, maybe those require 2 resume templates, and getting really clear and honing sort of the assets that you need for this. If you're having trouble getting your job search off the ground, like actually applying for jobs or initiating conversations, I want you to think about what can you do in a 20-minute time period. Set a timer. We use, and everyone has one, right? Like we use the ones on our phone, and it's really important to just start small. And a lot of people manage their whole job search on 20 minutes a week. And if they're lucky, maybe they get an hour here or there, but people have kids, people are working, I don't need to tell you, there's a lot going on, but small habits can really get you started and help you generate momentum. I want you for the first 4 to 8 weeks to really focus on your output and not the outcome. Who here has submitted for a job and then sat reloading their inbox for hours on end? Like, I know I did that and I for sure knew better. So I really want you to kind of just focus on the process as you're getting started, focus on iterating and getting better at the summary of qualifications, which take practice, focus on finding jobs that you are aligned with and feel like they're worth pursuing and knowing more about. Quality, process is everything here. Another exercise that we have our clients do when they're there's very good reasons that people are skeptical about finding a better job. Like, people have been burned a job, they're not treated well, they're burned out, things are falling apart here. Like, it's very stressful to just exist right now, much less have a job search, which adds a lot more stress to your plate. So what I like to suggest is that people start with a low risk opportunity. Don't wait for a job that's a 10 out of 10. Apply to a job that's a 6 out of 10, especially if you haven't really practiced your summary of qualifications and you're still working on getting your resume to where you want it to be. Well, let's not wait for the perfect job to land in your lap before we start learning how to employ these strategies. Let's practice with the imperfect jobs. And I run these job search accelerators, and the last 2 times, at least one person has done a low risk application, and both of those people have not only gotten interviews, but landed offers that they were excited to accept. So their low stakes opportunity that didn't sound that exciting on paper became more compelling as they went through the process. And they only had that opportunity because they put themselves forward and took a low risk to begin with. Also, create a submit ritual for yourself. So when I'm writing resumes for clients, there are a few things that I have. First, I do the structure. I have a whole hour where I just fix the structure and formatting. Then I make content improvements, and then I need to sleep on my it's part of my creative process. I got to sleep on my creative changes. And then I wake up the next morning with my coffee, usually in my pajamas, if I'm being totally honest. And that's when I do my best editing work. And so that's when I make any final revisions before sending it off to a client. So having a process like that really helps me meet the deadlines of getting resumes back to clients. And I think it also helps my clients keep the commitments they have to themselves and get their applications out the door. Your checklist doesn't have to look like mine, or your process doesn't have to look like mine. Maybe you want a friend to proofread it. Maybe you want to sleep on it. Maybe you want to wait until it's a Saturday and you can look at it without the stress of the work week hanging over you. Whatever it is, it can help you be consistent. Kimberly, so I said that the cover letter should be complementary to the summary of qualifications and give a little bit more context and detail there. So it can say more about the how, it can elaborate on the outcomes. Obviously, if you're making a career transition, you want to take a little bit of space to speak to that as well. Annika says, it is stressful when a lot of places ghost applicants. 100%. You should expect the ghosting. I would just make peace with that so that you don't have to sort of have it hanging over you. It's very much people are overworked, and unfortunately that includes recruiters and hiring managers. So it's often not personal. It is part of the process. Alita says, is 6 out of the 10 the lowest you should go? That's a good question. I think you could do a 3 out of 10, honestly, if you just want to practice your resume and sort of rip the Band-Aid off this process. But I think closer to a 6 probably means that you might actually want to take the interview should you get one. So I would keep in mind, like, this feels like a throwaway application experiment, but that's not always the case. So if I didn't want to waste time interviewing for something that I definitely didn't want, then I would keep it to something like a 5 or a 6. And I think anything less than that, you're probably out of alignment in more ways than one. We have this rule in our community, or this saying, I should say, it's not really a rule, which is the best kind of resume is a submitted resume. I have ideas and thoughts on resumes. I could talk about this for the rest of the day, but none of it really matters if it stays in the cloud or on your desktop. Like, it needs to be moving out. There needs to be like an outward energy. You know, like they say in business, you need to spend money to make money. You got to think of your resume as sort of what you have to spend. You have to spend the time submitting it and putting it in front of other people. And this is how you iterate. It's how you get opportunities. Like, it's so key in this process. And if you're not doing that, you don't really have a job search. You have a job browse, as my friend Shannon says. So let's talk about connection. And by that, I mean relationships, and what the relationship is between connection and your resume, and how to leverage these two in different ways and also simultaneously. There was a question in the last workshop about, when do I reach out? Is it when the job is posted? I'd like to share my 2 cents on that, because this is something I see, and I want you to hear what I encourage my clients to do, which is, in an ideal world, we establish the relationships with the people who are hiring before the jobs are posted. And so I think that insight can help us understand the value of proactively curating relationships and connections beyond what's just posted today. A lot of times what happens when the job is posted is that lots of people then want to reach out and network. And so it becomes difficult to sort of field that, especially from cold connections, if there isn't an existing relationship there. What I've seen a lot is that people know people, have relationships, and they craft job postings around that person and post those publicly, and want the person they know to apply for it. So I think it's hugely advantageous to be cultivating relationships and applying for jobs simultaneously, because it's a long game with networking, because people don't stop. An application is only good for one job, but relationships will last you your career. So for that reason, I think it's really important that you do cultivate those relationships. On the flip side, if you need to be more reactive, there are a couple of things I would do. If you have a set of target companies, I would look to see if their recruiters are online. If so, I would send them a connection message, and I would make it super brief. Our whole communication process and strategy here is like, make it easy to say yes. And so what I would say is, hey, I'm really interested in working for She Geeks Out. I'm sending a connection request because I'd love to see the jobs you post. Thanks for your time, Jen, right? Super simple. Now, when I start seeing jobs, that Rachel's posting that really aren't a good fit for me, what I can do to kind of nurture that relationship is share that job with my network. She Geeks Out is looking for a digital marketer. Anyone in my network interested, right? Or I could tag people. And so it's a way to sort of nurture and engage and stay on people's radar without having to be sending messages all the time. So that's one way to be proactive. If a job is posted and you want to apply and no one, by all means, throw a Hail Mary here. Stranger things have happened. But I just want to say that I think this is one of the least common ways I see relationship building work for people. So a couple of thoughts here, and I'm happy to take questions on that too. Is I really want you to think about these relationships. Cultivating them should be a priority, even if you have a really strong resume. You're going to be able to use your network also to gain information about what it's like to work at certain places and whether an application is even worthwhile. And that's really what alignment is about, right? And I'm sure many of you have concerns about landing in a place that shares your values, feels like a good fit. And there's really no better way of assessing that than, if you know people who work there. I've even had clients reach out on LinkedIn, find former staff and reach out to them. So you've got a lot of options here in terms of thinking about how to leverage connection and relationships. Also sharing a really well-tailored resume with folks who can get it in front of the right people, obviously a good strategy. And building these relationships, proactively when possible, I do think is super valuable. So you might be asking, like, what does care, self-care, and community care have to do with any of this? I really firmly believe, like, I don't like wasting time, and I have a lot of interests. And so being strategic for me means that we have cleared our schedule for things that are important for you. It might be friends, family, caretaking, volunteering, social justice work. It might be sleeping, like it might be going for walks. It might be whatever is helping you stay grounded these days. The last thing I want our clients to do, or really anyone to do, is turn their job search into a full-time job. The likelihood that there are 40 hours a week of quality aligned jobs for you to apply for is so low. I've never seen it for anyone. And even if you're looking to kind of just get your foot in the door and get a salary and some health benefits, that still doesn't include every job. So think about what your floor is and figure out, how you can target the right kind of strategic roles in a strategic way so that you're saving time, and you can, have this sort of work-life balance that we're all looking for. Annika, this is a really good statement here. I've always struggled with the cultivation part after the first time I've reached out. So let me share what I think our job is when we're reaching out to connect with people. We are planting seeds. And I'm not a farmer, or I don't even have a green thumb, so I can only take this metaphor so far. But really what I think this is like we never yield 100% of what we've planted. And if we want to engage new people in our network, then we have to plant a lot of seeds, because only some of it is going to turn into fruitful, valuable, mutually beneficial relationships. And that's okay, but we just need to know that kind of going into the process so we can manage our own expectations. Another thing that I think is like very helpful is, something like She Geeks Out, or also, organizations like Women in Project Management or something like that, where you can find people where you have mutual interests so that there's that sort of natural connection that doesn't feel like quite such a stretch, if that makes sense. Okay. So here are a couple of things that I think will make the job search, customization, resume writing a little bit more efficient for you. As you're creating bullet points for your resume in your summary of qualifications, make yourself a little library so that you can refer back to it and really make tweaking your applications more of a cut and paste, quick edit job as you go. It takes most of my clients about 3 to 5 iterations of the summary of qualifications before they nail it. So please build in the practice time into your schedule, and then keep a track of all the bullet points that you're using so that you can reuse them. Again, quality over quantity. I'm going to say that that's the hill I'm going to die on today. Don't turn it into a full-time job. Give yourself, a lot of times people ask me for permission to take breaks, and the answer is always, well, you don't need to ask my permission. And also, yes, you should take breaks here. So I want you to really think about, what do you need? And oftentimes you need rest. And when people come to me super burned out, the last thing I want to do is put 20 hours of work on their plate. Like, what's the easiest possible way? What's the move we can make with the biggest bang for our buck? Like, let's start there. I'm also a big believer. It's the shorthand for summary of qualification, Andrea. Breaks can help produce higher work, so higher quality work. So if you find that you're just like inattentive, losing interest, turning things into a quantity-oriented job search again, it's usually a sign that you need a break, and it's perfectly okay and ideal, actually, to take one. Okay, I think we're doing good on time here. So let me just take, Kimberly says, I'm interested in more than one type of job. What's the best approach with a LinkedIn profile to reflect that and not turn away potential leads? Great question. I often look at what's the Venn diagram of skills that those jobs require. And then I try to write a LinkedIn profile that highlights that. And if the job titles are complementary, there's probably some keyword work we can use in the summary and headline as well. Lauren, this was my question and I appreciate you addressing it. This makes my head spin. There are so many companies to make connections. If they don't have a job posted, seems so overwhelming. I'm not lazy. I'm going to put in the work. So I would actually just pick 5, do alphabetical order, do 5 companies that you know people at, or 5 companies whose work you've seen, or 5 companies who have someone that went to the same college as you. Don't worry about where to start, worry about starting, and the rest will just fall into place. Overwatering can kill the plant. That's good. Someone here can give better. Thank you, Christine. Give it love, give it what it needs. Sometimes it's food, water, sunshine, 100%. All of that is accurate for job seekers as well. Okay, awesome. So now we're coming back to the tail end of the cycle here, the last step, and that is like assessing the work that we've done. So again, I'm assuming, that you've been engaged in your job search, and here are some of the things that I look for when I'm talking to people. The number of jobs that you've applied for, the number of interviews you've had, the number of phone screens. If you're more exploratory, maybe you're telling me about the informational interviews and how you feel about those opportunities and companies that you've been exploring. The number of people who even know what you're looking for. Like, these are just some of the metrics that I think can really help me tell, like, this person has gotten their job search off the ground and they're stuck, or this person needs help getting their job search off the ground, which is usually sort of the two places people are when they end up on my, doorstep, so to speak. Okay, so I have the list of questions. Let me just pull, I'm going to do some speed questions or answers to questions that I got, which Rachel helpfully shared before the show. But what I want to say, just as we're wrapping up, is that just because your job search looks and feels a little bit like this now, I thought these were like a little overwrought and dramatic, but I've gotten a lot of feedback that this is legit what job searching feels like. So I want you to know that you could be, in another place really soon. And that oftentimes, actually no one fails at this. Sometimes people stop because they've changed their mind. They've gotten a promotion. Maybe their boss quit and their job got better. Something shifted for them at work. They decided to go out and do something entirely different. But nobody who starts looking for a job doesn't end up with one. But it really is about persistence. And so many times people are a lot closer to success than they realize. So I just want to kind of leave you officially with that belief that I have, that you could be a lot closer than you think here. I'm going to also just leave up a slide because I do have a July job search accelerator. And Rachel, maybe I can send you a link to this since you're set. Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to invite any questions into the chat here as well. I'm going to do a quick rundown of the questions that I didn't answer organically as we're wrapping up. And anything that doesn't get answered, we can talk about over at the booth afterwards. So here we go. I love doing rapid job search questions. This is like the best way for me to spend the day. Okay. The best resume for structuring to get your foot in the door for a career change. I always use chronological. I've never worked with a client where I've done a functional resume. I like to just tell stories chronologically. I think that's one of the clearer ways to do that. But a functional resume where you kind of focus on relevant skills is an option potentially, but I wouldn't overthink it. Oftentimes chronological works fine. How do you handle political volunteer work on your resume? How do you handle political volunteer work on your resume? So if it's volunteer work, and you want to share that, I think that's fine. I would list volunteer work after paid experience. I wasn't sure if this question was about like the political nature, like how do I share political experience or maybe beliefs? I think at this particular point in time, whatever your political beliefs are, you better say them with your whole chest. So whoever you've worked for, whatever it is, like I would say it, you probably don't want to work with people who aren't on the same page. So sometimes we set ourselves up for a little bit of rejection by being really authentic, but I tend to think that works in favor of people who are looking for alignment. How do older women show that they are a good fit? So I think it's so important that experienced professionals are looking for jobs that are as aligned as possible with their years of experience. Also, we may want to de-emphasize the years of experience in your summary of qualifications if, in fact, you're looking to take sort of a step down or not kind of leverage all those years of your experience. I think that can be really important. I also think if you are engaged with your network and up to date on your skills, I I think I see women in their 50s and 60s get jobs all the time. So I actually helped someone last year, a woman in her 60s who's awesome, and had never gotten a job by applying online before. So I definitely, let me know if I can be helpful any further on that. But I think it's really about having a really strong application and finding the right kind of roles and knowing what kind of environment you're going to thrive in. How do you put together a marketable resume from unconventional and varied job experience? I think the summary of qualifications is clutch for something like this. If people have done consulting or freelance work, I sometimes consolidate those jobs so that there's a little bit more cohesion. I'm not sure if that's relevant in this case, but happy to answer other questions at the booth. Tips on understanding new work area language for resumes. I think this is about translating the experience. So just paying really close attention. Are they using client? Are they using customer? Are they using, team, or are they using, like, what is the vernacular of this, industry or organization, and how closely can you mirror that in a way that, you can do with integrity? How do you best explain gaps in employment? We don't owe anyone an explanation for our gaps in employment. So find the quick way. I took some time off from work. Great, end of story. Some people are really transparent. I took some time off to travel. I took some time off to care for a family member. The reason you're out of work is not part of the qualification. So I really would rather you use your narrative, not feeling like you need to explain yourself to a recruiter, but focusing on the qualifications and experience that you do have. And these days, I think recruiters are a lot more flexible on things like gaps. And the last couple of years have been bananas. I think they're about to be bananas again. So I think everyone, a lot more people have gaps. When transitioning out of a career, how do you get your resume to be seen? The right kinds of jobs, summary of qualifications, and aligned resume. I feel like my job title is specific. I'm having trouble finding things that match my skill set. I'm curious about this one. How do I guess I need a little bit more information to be helpful here. So please come to the booth, and if this is you, and tell me more about that. Yeah, I think that might be, let me see if I can answer anything here. I think I'm on time. Rachel, please feel free to cut me off here if I am, in fact. I'm counting on you to step in here. If you're pivoting out of your field, should that be your objective summary? No, I don't think it should be, because I think that I don't think that adds value, right? Like, they're not looking for a pivot. If they say we're looking to hire someone switching fields, then by all means, draw attention to it. But otherwise, that's really more part of your story. And I'd rather you use the space to share your qualifications. I dabble as an independent contractor. My field is digital marketing. I get people reaching out. What can I do to get? So one thing you could do, Rosanna, is you could remove the benefits I guess I'm not sure where you're getting the pings from. You could remove the less relevant experience. And if you don't remove it from LinkedIn, I'm not sure that there's a way that you can prevent that. But I would make sure that the headline, the experience section, and the about section speak to the job skills and experience for what you actually want. Is there a good way to show skills you have learned on your own outside of a specific job? Portfolios, side projects. I've had clients do things like side projects. I do think there's a definite bias towards paid work. So sometimes clients will do like freelancing, or like do it for like nominal money, just, work with clients for practically nothing so that they can kind of say they've had the experience. I don't like to suggest people work for free or near free, but sometimes that's how people build their portfolio. Did I miss anything? All right, I think I dropped my contact info in there, and I'll just leave this up in case anyone wants to follow along on social. But otherwise, I just want to say thank you so much. I'm going to hang out at my booth, so come visit.